Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you, everyone, for joining today's community feedback session on the LA County Cannabis Equity Program. Joining me today, or rather, my name first is Fernando Nieto. I am a senior analyst with the Office of Cannabis Management. And also joining me today is the rest of the Office of Cannabis Management team, Laura Magallanes, Suzette Beeman, Julian Garcia, and Vicky Glinsky. Today, you'll learn more about the recently published equity assessment on the county's Cannabis Equity Program, and you'll also have the opportunity to provide feedback that will help shape what the program ultimately looks like. Before we get underway, the County of Los Angeles, a quick land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kizh, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants. So now a few housekeeping items. You can enable closed captions using the option at the bottom of your screen. You can also use the chat feature to submit comments and questions. Also, I want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted online. The presentation will be emailed to attendees after the webinar. And finally, there is a survey to gather additional feedback on various aspects of the equity program. I want to encourage everyone to complete that survey. I'll also go ahead and drop a link to that survey right in the chat. Okay. So where are we here? The purpose of today's meeting is for the Office of Cannabis Management to share the equity assessment commissioned by the county and for all of you to provide your feedback on some of the most impactful recommendations of its authors. Specifically, the recommendations related to who is eligible for the equity program, what resources the program should offer, and how cannabis tax revenues should be reinvested back into the unincorporated communities producing them. So before we begin, I also want to remind everyone that the recommendations in the assessment express opinions of its authors and focus group participants and does not necessarily represent views of the Office of Cannabis Management. OCM will continue to a community-driven collaborative process to shape the county's equity program. And I just want to remind everyone that everyone on the call will have an opportunity to share their suggestions and their ideas, and also just to listen actively with an ear to understanding others' views. So let's do a quick rundown of today's agenda. First, we're going to provide some background to add more context to the discussion. Review the Cannabis Equity Assessment findings and takeaways. Then we'll set aside some time to hear your feedback and reflections on the information we've presented here today. Finally, we'll round out the presentation with some next steps. Now, I want to do a quick activity for everyone before to help us kind of think about what equity in the cannabis industry really means. So for this activity, you can use your phones, and what you'll do is you want to text cannabis 4901 to the number 22333. And what I want to do is just share some words that summarize what cannabis equity means to you. And this will be a really great activity just to kind of bring everybody together and also get a sense of how everyone thinks of equity and just get like a really broad set of perspectives. So I'll give everyone a quick moment to do that. All right, looks like we're already having some responses roll in. Jobs, access, justice, opportunity. Great. Opportunities. Okay. So the bigger the words, then we kind of start to see a theme. More people are considering access and justice as ways to define equity, and how cannabis equity can potentially be defined. Capital, resources. All right, great. Great. Go ahead and keep submitting responses there. We'll definitely be able to use this to get a sense of where everyone stands on what cannabis equity really means to them. So appreciate everyone's responses for this community. Great. So I think one thing that the word cloud shows us is that equity means different things to different people. And coming to a shared definition of equity among a diverse group of stakeholders is really challenging. Despite this challenge, participants from the Equity Assessment Focus Group identified two critical elements of cannabis equity, social equity and health equity. Additionally, a central theme of the focus group participants' definition of equity was access, or more specifically, that the connection across social and health equity comes from addressing the systemic disparity in access to power and access to wealth. However we define equity in the cannabis industry, the equity assessment suggests that starting with a definition of equity rooted in meaningful and continuous engagement will help build an equity program that achieves its full potential over the long term. So what is an equity program? The term might not be familiar to everyone on this call. To help explain, we could look toward the California Cannabis Equity Act, which defines an equity program as a program that focuses on inclusion and support of individuals and communities in California's cannabis industry who are linked to populations or neighborhoods that were negatively or disproportionately impacted by cannabis criminalization, as evidenced by the local jurisdiction's equity assessment. Now let's take a moment to provide more context to today's discussion and go over background of the county's cannabis equity program, also as well as the Office of Cannabis Management, or OCM. OCM was officially created back in 2017, and it was tasked with serving the county and its residents in the equitable transition of cannabis to a regulated market through the development of responsible policies that also seek to promote the health, safety, and well-being of our communities. Generally speaking, we also function as a coordinating office for the county that engages departments, industry and community groups, and other stakeholders in the development of equitable programs and policies. And we serve as the first point of contact in response to cannabis-related issues and concerns from the public. It's been a long road since our inception, and the Board of Supervisors redirected our office to move forward with developing a commercial cannabis regulatory framework in July 2021. This timeline demonstrates the cautious and methodical approach the board has taken in deciding to move forward with a legalization process for unincorporated areas. While it has taken some time, it's also providing us with an opportunity to learn from the approaches and experiences of other jurisdictions and apply their lessons learned and best practices into our work. And it's also allowed us to establish the right strategic partnerships before the official launch. Over the past year, our office has moved forward with recommending an updated regulatory framework, awarded a grant from the state to conduct an equity assessment, and most recently supported the creation of a cannabis tax framework for businesses located in unincorporated areas of the county through the passage of Measure C, a general tax on cannabis businesses, approved by voters during last November's election. Now I want to provide a brief overview of the updated cannabis regulatory framework approved by the Board of Supervisors last February that was rooted in social equity. The program will start with 90 permits that regulate 6 business activities as part of the phased implementation process. This includes 25 retail, 25 delivery or non-storefront retail, and 10 each of everything else, including manufacturing, distribution, testing, and cultivation. Micro businesses will also be allowed. Starting with this amount will allow the county to monitor and assess community impacts and efficacy of regulations and ensure that none of the supervisorial districts have an overconcentration of cannabis businesses. We will also implement permitting in phases by starting with retail and delivery permits first. This will allow us to reduce administrative bottlenecks and stay flexible and adaptive so that we can adjust as needed. So that after a couple of years of implementation, the board may choose to scale up over time to accommodate a larger regulated market. The framework also allows cannabis businesses to be located in certain commercial and manufacturing zones and requires buffer zones for cannabis retailers to be located no less than 600 feet from specific uses such as schools, daycares, public parks, and public libraries. This is also consistent with the state law and the county's alcohol outlet zoning ordinance. I also want to emphasize that as part of this regulatory process, our office will be completing a programmatic environmental impact report in compliance with CEQA requirements to identify and mitigate any significant environmental impacts the program may have. This process will allow for additional community feedback during the development of the zoning ordinances. Lastly, the proof framework allowed us to move forward with the development of an equity program to help address gaps in educational, technical, and financial resources exacerbated by the war on drugs and to address administrative and infrastructure barriers that create inequitable outcomes. So now a quick look at the process for developing an equity program. Our process to develop an equity program starts with the equity assessment, but continues with gathering community feedback and conducting additional data, policy, and legal analysis. From there, we can compile our findings and provide a report back with recommendations regarding policy options for implementing a cannabis equity program. With board approval, we can move forward with implementation of the program and ongoing monitoring and evaluation. So what is the equity assessment? Well, an equity assessment helps to inform the creation of a local cannabis equity program and also allows a jurisdiction to be eligible to apply for state grants and funding for implementation of the program. The county's equity assessment was led by doctors Dilara Uskup and Robert Chala, academic researchers with more than 15 combined years of on-the-ground research with cannabis social equity and legacy operators, workers, and consumers. The assessment highlighted insights from a variety of sources, including in-depth literature review, peer-reviewed and community-engaged research sources, and in-person focus groups. The report assesses current practices, identifies challenges facing Los Angeles County in its implementation of an equitable cannabis permitting program, and offers potential solutions based on best practices. The assessment also includes 19 total categories of preliminary recommendations to support an equitable cannabis industry, including some that require significant time, investment, and risk mitigation. Once again, I want to emphasize that the Office of Cannabis Management commissioned the report, and it does not necessarily represent the views of our office, but expresses the opinions of its authors and focus group participants. I also want to emphasize that this is a first step in our equity program development. So the recommendations in this report are not final. And we recognize that this is an ongoing process that includes stakeholder feedback and will require additional data, policy, and legal analysis moving forward. Now let's do a brief overview of some of the key findings from the equity assessment. One of the first key findings should really come as no surprise, and it is that Black and Latino communities have been disproportionately and adversely impacted by cannabis criminalization, prohibition, and the war on drugs. This has led to billions of dollars being diverted from community needs toward cannabis policing and law enforcement. This diversion of funds has had the effect of increasing social and health disparities over the many years of fighting the war on drugs. What's also more concerning is that even after the passage of Proposition 64, which created a recreational market, cannabis-related disparities still persist. For example, LAPD arrest data shows that Blacks and Latinos made up 75% of cannabis-related arrests in 2019 and 2020. Another example can be found in LA County Sheriff's data. which shows a higher concentration of cannabis-related incidents in predominantly Black and Latino communities compared to predominantly white communities. Another key finding of the equity assessment involved identifying how other programs in other jurisdictions have fallen short by not taking a holistic approach that addresses the most significant barriers for equity applicants, like a lack of resources, predatory investment practices, monopolistic practices, and the continued challenges associated with federal prohibition. For example, like the simple act of being able to open a business bank account. Now, the challenges of other jurisdictions is not to throw any of these other jurisdictions under the bus, because the fact is that building an equity program is not easy, and it requires an immense amount of time, effort, resources, and in some cases, trial and error. This quote from a prospective operator on an interaction she witnessed between an investor and social equity program participant highlights one of the challenges commonly faced by these individuals. So, what other barriers do equity applicants face when entering the market? Well, the reason a lot of these programs often fall short is because of the numerous barriers they face on their path toward launching a cannabis business. The equity assessment highlighted some of the most significant barriers listed here. First up is limited access to capital. Many cannabis businesses lack access to a traditional banking system and therefore traditional financial instruments to help support and grow their business. Because of strict sensitive use buffers and zoning requirements, cannabis businesses also often face a lack of compliant and affordable real estate. Another common issue is high taxes and fees, which are a challenge due to a combination of state, local, and sales taxes and high fees to obtain the permits and licenses needed to operate. The list of barriers for equity applicants goes on. I also think it's worth acknowledging that it's true that these barriers are faced by most types of businesses, not just cannabis businesses, but it's also true that cannabis entrepreneurs can't access many existing government resources, like small business development centers, mentorship opportunities through organizations like SCORE, and loans backed by the Small Business Administration that can be critical to grow a business. All of these programs are federally funded, and they are then inaccessible to cannabis entrepreneurs because of the ongoing prohibition of cannabis at the federal level. So, how do we work towards equity now that we understand the barriers involved and the equity assessments recommendations to define equity through a social lens and a health lens? The report identifies three key elements for building an equitable program and defining a holistic vision of equity. The program should prioritize equitable ownership and job opportunities. It should reinvest in the community, and it should achieve broader social and health equity that goes beyond the cannabis market by supporting workers and the local economy. Now let's take a look at some of the key takeaways and proposed recommendations from the equity assessment. So as I mentioned before, the equity assessment provides 19 categories of recommendations, which include additional sub-recommendations in each of those categories. So I wanted to give you a quick snapshot of some of those takeaways. Generally speaking, the equity assessment highlights the importance of the county's support through equitable administrative policies and processes, including prioritizing equity in permitting, simplifying application processes, and developing helpful tools and materials for applicants to understand the processes and requirements. In addition to identifying opportunities to lessen burdensome requirements, such as requiring property toward the latter stages of permitting until it's truly needed, all the way to increasing permit availability over the course of 5 years to avoid the creation of an inflated market to buy and sell scarce permits. The assessment also recommends providing equity applicants with appropriate financial support through reduced or waived fees and grants or repayable low interest rate loans to adequately support the financial needs of equity applicants. Additionally, it recommends developing equitable programs that support business owners, and their workers through one-stop shop technical assistance prior to permitting. The one-stop shop would include legal support, financial guidance, employee training, and business development trainings to ensure owners receive appropriate education and tools to successfully launch a business, while also being protected from predatory investments. The, the assessment emphasizes workforce development support through equity hiring goals and the creation of workforce pipelines through strategic partnerships. In addition to these, the report also includes other notable takeaways, focusing on strategies to transition from an unregulated to regulated market through an education-first approach and direct outreach to unregulated market operators through trusted community organizations, increasing administrative fines targeted at landlords renting to unregulated, non-compliant businesses, reinvesting cannabis tax revenues through Measure C and profits back into communities, protecting and educating users through additional public outreach, educational programs, and campaigns, and also supporting transformative justice through additional outreach and hosting of record expungement fairs and events. So you could see there's a lot to unpack here. So we do recommend taking some time to read through the recommendations and the equity assessment, which you can find by visiting our website. While we'd like to go into detail on each of these recommendations, our goal was really to pull some of the most critical ones and focus on those for now to get the equity program up and running. So what are those priority recommendations? Well, these are the 4 areas we are really looking to prioritize to ensure that we're building a strong foundation for our equity program. Priority permitting, which encompasses, so the first step is priority permitting. This encompasses defining who should be prioritized, identifying the communities most disproportionately impacted, and the processes to prioritize qualifying individuals. Next up is business development and technical and legal assistance. This will be utilized to increase access to the education, training, and experience necessary to operate a successful business, which is really critical in the cannabis industry because, as we all know, cannabis is one of the most highly regulated consumer goods, and it requires specialized knowledge and experience. So hands-on technical assistance provided by staff through a cannabis concierge model, as well as third-party technical assistance providers, will be critical to help businesses remain in compliance and support equity applicants throughout the license and permit application process. We're also aware of the predatory practices of many investors. So it's our goal to ensure that we protect our applicants by providing pro bono and low bono legal assistance. Also, job training and workforce development. So not everyone wants to own and operate their own business. That's why it's really important to increase workforce diversity and employment opportunities in communities and populations disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. So job training and workforce development is a really critical component of the program. And then finally, financial assistance and access to capital. Lastly, providing more access to capital to help equity applicants enter the regulated market is a key goal of the program. Now, again, I want to mention many of these services are available to other types of businesses, but cannabis businesses in particular do not have the same access to these resources as businesses in other industries. So I also want to highlight some of the key proposed recommendations in the equity assessment. One of the most important questions is determining who would be eligible for an equity program. The equity assessment includes recommended baseline requirements for eligibility. These baseline requirements include individuals and communities directly impacted by the war on drugs, either with a prior federal, state, or local cannabis conviction, or having a parent or guardian or spouse or domestic partner of an individual with a prior cannabis related conviction. Another eligibility requirement could include residency and income. So residing for at least 5 years in an unincorporated LA County census tract where 60% or more of the population is housing burdened and earns 80% of the Los Angeles County median household income. And just so a clarifying point, housing burdened means those who pay more than 50% of their income on housing and earn 80% of the median family income. Another component is ownership, at least 51% individual pooled or cooperative ownership by equity applicants. Additionally, the equity assessment also recommends a mixed merit and lottery approach, where points would be awarded for meeting certain criteria based on social responsibility commitments, mixed with lottery if a large number of applicants reach a point threshold. An important point here I'd like to mention is that over the past few years, eligibility criteria from other equity programs have been legally challenged, specifically criteria related to residency requirements. Our office continues to monitor these lawsuits, but eligibility criteria will require additional legal analysis. So this chart shows, or this table, shows how, or rather we can see how some of the other places and jurisdictions have defined their equity program eligibility criteria. Generally, equity programs often use one or a combination of the requirements listed at the top of each column. So, including a prior cannabis conviction or arrest of an immediate family member, residency in an area of disproportionate impact for a predetermined number of years, low income status, and minimum ownership requirements in the company for equity applicants. Now, here we add the recommendations from the equity assessment and how they compare to other jurisdictions. As you can see, the recommendations and the requirements proposed in the equity assessment can differ across all programs. And comparing the eligibility recommendations in the equity assessment to these examples, we can see that there are some commonalities, but there are also some differences, particularly in the areas of residency. So another key recommendation is the report also includes recommendations to support workforce development, including local hiring requirements, with 40% from unincorporated LA County areas that have been impacted by the war on drugs. And also, the assessment recommends adding incentives for businesses to increase targeted hiring all the way up to 80%. It recommends tying compliance with the annual repermitting process. And it also recommends creating cannabis workforce pipelines and paid apprenticeships through strategic partnerships, such as universities and leveraging county resources, as well as labor peace agreement requirements, using the City of LA's program as an example. Lastly, the report highlights the importance of community reinvestment as a way to ensure new investments created by cannabis taxes can go back into and benefit economic opportunities for local communities. They recommend using Measure C cannabis tax revenues to support the equity program, including grants and loans for equity applicants, and developing a mechanism to allow cannabis businesses to invest in a community funding stream. I'm also pleased to report a recent development related to this recommendation. On Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors approved a motion to develop a spending plan for future cannabis business tax revenues in unincorporated areas of the county to ensure tax revenue addresses the harms of criminalization. Okay, so now we're at the point of the agenda where we'd like to get your feedback and comments on some of the things that you've just heard. Specifically, we'd like to get your feedback and commentary on these 4 topics to which we've provided some guiding questions. We have 4 questions here. I'll go through these quickly. So, who should be eligible for the county's Cannabis Equity Program? What business and workforce development resources would you like to see offered by the county's Cannabis Equity Program? 3. What programs or services should be prioritized when allocating cannabis business tax revenues? And 4, how can we ensure cannabis businesses benefit the communities they are located in? Now we'll open it up. You may provide verbal comments by raising your hand to request to be unmuted, or written comments in the chat. Verbal comments will have about a minute to speak so that we can get as many comments in as possible in the allotted time. You can raise your hand to request to be unmuted. So just click on the hand icon, or as I mentioned, you can also type your question using the chat button. And my colleague will unmute anybody that has their hand raised.
Am I able to go now?
Yes.
So I'd just like to first comment on who should be eligible for the social equity program. While I understand and I'm very sensitive to disproportionately affected areas, I do think that the range of effect of cannabis prohibition varies largely, even in those with convictions. A simple possession conviction is much different than someone who was, for example, operating a pre-ICO dispensary and had not only their freedom but their business stripped from them and may have spent decades, if not longer, in jail. That's a much different offense. That's a much different situation. And I think that those people should be the ones that are prioritized when we're talking about restorative justice, as they are the ones who built that medical industry for 215 that allowed for 64 to kind of come into place. So I think that we would be remiss if we did not put a priority on those people who paid a higher price than others. While I'm very sensitive to all the social equity applicants that I've worked with, the ones who have truly been disenfranchised from their businesses, some of whom wanted an appellate level because they were paying federal taxes. Those are the people that I feel should have at least the first shot in things like lotteries, but definitely priority, as that is a much larger disparagement.
Thank you for that comment. Once again, just please raise your hand. And also just a quick reminder, please limit your comments to about just 1 minute to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to provide a comment. All right, Sandy? Or Sandy, I see your hand up.
Are you maybe
Hello?
thinking?
Hello? Am I unmuted?
Oh, we have 2 unmutes. Sandy, can you go first and then Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I live I'm not against the cannabis, for the medical, but I am gonna write a very lengthy thing because I'm mostly we just had the funeral for the kid down the street that got stabbed in the valley, and I don't know if you guys were aware of that. At least 15 kids went up there and complained about the drugs in the community, what it's doing. It was kind of, we were there for a funeral, but it was this. But I'm not against the cannabis, but I also think that equity, to me, means that it should not all be placed in Whittier Boulevard in front of kids. I'm also graduated from USC with a law degree. And I do agree that the universities that push for cannabis, and I'm aware of the health science campus, that they should have cannabis shops there because they seem to put them in City Terrace and other communities. So when I see equity, I think that they should share those cannabis shops as well because they, I was a student there last year, and I was surprised to see it. They're pushing it in our community. I'm a Latina, I live in, and I see the consequences of it. I'm not against it, but I am against dabbing, and I do fight at a Congress level and trying to change the law on that. But yeah, I would like to see it at USC because USC pushes it for the students and for us to advocate. Of course, I'm not against it, all of it. I think it can be done right, but I'm seeing the number of students the number of children and young adults that are addicted to it. And second, I'm aware that USC also, when researching, I have a graduate level, I have a law degree at USC, so I'm very, that USC also does the drug, gets money for running the drug addiction amongst cannabis in our community. So they advocate for it in our community, and then they're also doing the research. So I would also like to see USC have, when it looks to equity, to me, because I'm Latina and I've seen what it's done to the community, the harsh one. I think it can be done right, but there's Delta 9 in there with psychosis on dabbing and a lot of the high concentrations THC, that I would like USC, if they're going to push it and if they're going to do the drug addiction, that they put those shops out where they have the student housing and they have all those shops at the bottom. I would like to see it there so they could see what equity is and they could see what it's doing to the community. So I get it. This is my feedback and my opinion. And I heard your disclaimer on like, oh, this is just based on this is not what you guys are just the office, but I see it at a very different impact because I'm at the other end of it. But again, I'm not close to it. I mean, I'm not, I get us, we're in a new generation, but
Okay.
equity means USC and other people that are pushing it to put it in their community as well.
Thank you, Sandy. Appreciate your comments, and thank you for adding that. Sarah, go ahead and you should receive an unmute request.
I am Sarah Armstrong. I represent Americans for Safe Access in LA County. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Good. Founded in 2002, we're the nation's oldest, largest organization for medical cannabis patients and others. I'm speaking today on item number 4. We believe that one of the best things that benefits the community is when cannabis businesses operate compassion programs. This ensures that those among the constituents who are too poor to afford to buy the cannabis they need for relief receive it free or at low cost. These are labor-intensive and expensive programs to run, thus they should count very heavily towards social responsibility requirements as well as community reinvestment. When you incentivize compassion programs, you ensure that the poorest and the sickest among us have the same access to medical cannabis as those who are not so burdened. I hope that the county will recognize how important these businesses, these compassion programs are, and allow a tax credit for all expenses related to the program, and will give them the highest priority in terms of scoring for points. Once again, these programs are run by the dispensary, the retailer, and they are a very direct and immediate way for the poor in the community to be benefited. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Sarah. Really appreciate it. All right, so we have at least about 10 minutes for this section to hear your feedback. After this, we'll go over some brief next steps. So if you have comments, please once again raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Once again, there's a reminder to give us your feedback, give us your opinions, let us know what you think and what this program really should look like. Sandy, I see your hand up. You should be requesting a unmute request.
Logan, I'm a director here for a nonprofit here in the San Fernando Valley. I think the biggest thing right now for me is we've seen the impact of cannabis sales in our community when Prop 64 came in. So I think it's super important to be able to educate these new retailers how to sell, making sure that they have strong guidelines and policies for their staff. The understanding that the sale of this product can impact the community that they have a business, the families, the surrounding area, the neighborhoods that they are investing these businesses in. So, and also just understanding that they need to be a part of the community, not just coming in to make their money and leave, right? We want them to be invested and give back to the community, but most importantly, protecting our youth. Anybody under the age of 21 to get marijuana products, because we do know and see the impact it has in our community. Just for a couple seconds is the news articles that we're having kids, under the age of 5, 6 have been reported of getting cannabis products at home. So really educating them and sharing those educational conversations that they can share with their customers as they take the product home, making sure they lock up their cannabis, especially edibles, because they just look like candy, right? So we want to make sure that our kids at home are safe. So understanding that this product has, we need to treat it just like alcohol, prescription pills, and secure it at all times. But that conversation starts with them as they sell that product.
Great, thank you, Sandy. So I'm hearing ensuring that we have like really strong operational standards for all of these businesses. Okay. So just a note here. Go ahead. Once again, raise your hand if you have a comment. Prioritizing verbal comments at the moment, but if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand, please, like I said, drop a message in the chat. Although we might not like read it out loud or get a chance to get to that, it's still going to be part of the record, and we're still going to review all of the comments that we received through here. Jenny, I see your hand up.
And I apologize, I didn't introduce myself before my last comment. My name is Jenny Dills. I am a longtime cannabis operator in multiple states, and as of late have been doing a lot of work doing business licensing coaching, compliance coaching, and operational standards coaching with social equity applicants. I think, and as far as the education piece and the predatory lending, as well as predatory landlord piece, cannabis industry, everyone thinks that we're making money hand over fist, and that's not always the case. So it's very unfortunate, especially in the instance of social equity, where there are both state and local guidelines restricting applicants from being able to go over a certain percentage of income, to look at a landlord who is used to working with traditional businesses and having to prove financial fitness for signing that lease. So understanding that many landlords with traditional cannabis businesses are asking more than triple or a premium rate, which is also very predatory, is also making it very impossible for these people to secure properties, which is a prerequisite for each level of licensure, and even to go forward with the initial screenings. Making sure that we're looking at people who are coming in as investors and looking at, do they have a stake in other cannabis licenses, especially other social equity licenses? There's a lot of theft of equity that goes on with these programs because there are such need for these applicants to find funding that they can't get. So they're pushed into a situation where they're no longer operating their business, which was supposed to be restorative justice and restoring equity. And they're no longer able to even profit from their business in many instances. So my recommendation would be making sure that people who aren't invested in other equity licenses, or these groups who will go around and try to purchase equity licenses, are allowed in as investors. And that's simple by having a fair equity share review, a complete equity share review that's done by the department as they process these applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Brad, I see your hand up. You should receive an unmute request. Go ahead. You're unmuted. Oh, unmuted again. There
Hi,
we
this
go.
is Brad. Oh, hi,
Right.
this is Brad Rowe. I teach cannabis policy at UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, and have been working with social equity licensees and applicants throughout the state for a while now. What I would hope that the county could do is to help a lot of these applicants that are getting into a very difficult industry at a very difficult time, to secure the resources that they need, not only to access capital and real estate and some other things like that, but to have the potential for a risk assessment period in the beginning, in which the county or whatever jurisdiction it is that they're working in works through their ability to support and drive a business, so the business owners, the licensees, are going in with a knowledge of what the odds are as they're entering into an extremely challenging market. If they want to go ahead and beat the odds, that's great. Everyone has that opportunity as an entrepreneur, but to get that information out there, also to support anything that might look like sources of banking through either the community or the state, the ability to create a pool of assets and resources for these businesses, and also to consider the ability of the county to take a leadership role in supporting communities that have been disproportionately impacted in the war on drugs. You mentioned looking at the legal side of that, specifically the dormant clause and interstate commerce challenges that are coming to location-based awarding of licenses and of prioritization of licensing. It would be very helpful if the county were to lend some support to efforts to bring some challenges to these lawsuits that are getting rid of the ability to use location as a grounds for social equity businesses. And I just also want to reiterate what a couple of the people have said already. This is about a product that needs to be taken seriously, and we have got to do whatever we can do to make sure that we protect the medical community and their access to quality, safe products, and to not over-regulate this industry, certainly, especially with our smaller social equity businesses, so that we're not pushing consumers over the unlicensed, untested, unregulated market. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Really appreciate your comments. All right, so we still have a few more minutes here to continue with the comments. Once again, just a reminder, it is a community feedback session, so open to your comments on ideally one of these 4 questions. But meanwhile, while you think about any additional comments you might have, I do want to address one of the questions in the chat. This one came from Richard. I think it should be public how much cannabis taxes the people and the city are making and where the money is being used for or allocated to. So I think that's more of a comment, but kind of a question. So I also want to highlight once again that on Tuesday, the board did approve a motion for directing the department, or rather the Office of Cannabis Management, in coordination with several other departments and with a community-driven approach, to identify the primary like spending priorities and how cannabis business tax revenues should be utilized and allocated. Now, these first 2 questions, realize they're probably a little bit more for if you're interested in becoming a prospective operator. However, questions 3 and 4 can really apply to any community member. So really encourage your thoughts and feedback there. Jenny, I see your hand up again. I'll go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you. Sorry, yes, it's me again.
No worries.
Kind of building off what Brad had stated about those compassionate care programs, I think there should also be some consideration given to how those programs operate. Many times people will do a SB 34 giveaway, but they're not giving away fresh product. They're giving away something that is very close to expiration, something they're getting ready to have to destroy because of that and going to lose that revenue. So instead of just throwing it away, destroying it, whatever they need to do, they're passing it along to more of our vulnerable patients, people with cancer, people with very severe HIV/AIDS patients, the weakest immune systems of most of our consumers. So I don't think that things that are very close to expiring or degrading or becoming less profitable for an operator should be eligible to be given away in that manner to people who are sick and truly need it for medicine. I think it's really important that those tax write-offs don't extend to product that is going to be expiring. Maybe give some sort of reasonable amount of time for those donated items before the date of expiration when they're used. So that would be my advice on that and my thought on that. And then as far as the services that are provided, so the coaching programs have been extremely helpful for applicants. Licensing, especially in this space, is a very difficult, confusing process that sometimes seems redundant because you don't understand the subtle differences in this form or this amount of information and who is the entity, who's the applicant, who's the social equity, what counts as an investment, as an ownership interest, or as a financial interest, because those are different things. So I think providing sources of help to them outside either a contractor or something that is able to help them through those programs once they're identified as qualified social equity applicants, and help them beginning with the exploratory process so that they feel supported and they don't give up and you truly have a successful social equity program instead of just a document. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate it. Okay. I think I definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I appreciate everyone's comments. I appreciate your verbal comments, your written comments, and all your questions. So now let's just wrap things up and move on to some of the next steps. So, as I mentioned earlier, this is all part of an ongoing process. So this chart just kind of shows some of the next steps in developing an equity program. So the equity assessment has been completed. Right now, we're also in the process of defining and mapping out the disproportionately impacted areas and determining how those areas are really defined and identified. So working on that right now, that work is in progress. We've also been carrying out these community feedback sessions. This is the 5th community feedback session and final, 5th and final community feedback session. We're also in the process of identifying partnerships to implement equity program components. So I think I saw a question in the chat about how do we ensure that folks are updated, trained, and able to function within the industry. Our goal is really to identify like experts, subject matter experts in the industry to help provide some of that important and critical training. We're in the process of identifying those individuals and groups right now. And finally, what is this all leading up to? So we're gonna take the recommendations from the equity assessment, the feedback that we've received throughout our 5 community feedback sessions, and also feedback that we received from our online survey to put together and propose some policy recommendations for the equity program. And the hope is to have that, or rather we anticipate compiling that information and submitting it to the board by the summer of 2023. Now, as I mentioned, this is the fifth of, or the final of five total community feedback sessions. We had four in-person feedback sessions throughout different locations in the county. If anybody on this call attended those, any of those meetings, definitely appreciate you coming out and showing up to that, to those feedback sessions. Finally, I also really want to emphasize the online survey that we put together to accompany the equity assessment and some of its recommendations. We've been getting some great comments, some great questions, but the equity assessment survey here is just another way to gather additional comments and really get to the heart of who should be eligible, what resources should be offered through the equity program, and also how cannabis business tax revenues should be utilized and reinvested back into the communities. So just really want to encourage everyone on this call to complete that survey and make sure that your feedback is heard and a part of the record. And finally, I just want to encourage everyone to stay connected and stay updated on the latest developments of OCM's program. Please visit our website at cannabis.lacounty.gov. We have that's where we post all of our latest information. You could find information on Measure C and the cannabis business taxes. You could find a link to the equity assessment and also the survey to accompany that equity assessment. So I encourage everyone to stay connected via our website. If you have additional comments, additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email at cannabis@lacounty.gov. And also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for updates and announcements. We try to post everything on there also and all of our latest news and developments. And that will conclude today's community feedback session. I want to thank everybody for attending today's session and providing your feedback, providing your comments. In the end, it's going to help us build a better program that is responsive to the community's needs and the community's concerns and all the stakeholders involved. So once again, thank you everybody for attending, and just stay tuned for additional updates as they come out. Bye everyone. Thank you.